Hello, friends.
The Bears are who we thought they were.
The Bears. The Bears.
I am the great Cornholio.
We'll see what happens.
Playoffs?
Seton Hall. Sean McDonough, Jay Billis. Goats.
Can you play a song? Something cool. Put my mic on!
I'm calling both games.
Oh, baby! Goes down the field for Smith.
Oh, he got it.
Seattle. We're getting ready for Cincinnati.
And we'll start in this segment with my top 10 Cinderella teams of March Madness, and we'll probably finish this up in the next segment. So there are a few teams that seem obvious here on top 10 Cinderella teams of this year's March Madness. Seems pretty obvious, right? Number one, as I mentioned earlier tonight, definitely St. Peter's, right? A 15th seed where some people didn't even, hadn't even heard about St. Peter's, didn't even know what that was prior to this tournament. And St. Peter's, just for entertainment purposes, I want you to go look at their basketball gym real quick. And for those of you listening here locally, the St. Peter's basketball gym is comparable to what we have at Millersville. Yes, St. Peter's is a Division I school. Millersville is D2. But just to put it in perspective, St. Peter's basketball gym, comparable to what Millersville has. So, St. Peter's being the first 15th seed ever to make it to the Elite Eight speaks for itself, right? That's Cinderella story material in of itself. But it wasn't like, they knocked off number 2 seed Kentucky and then had a cakewalk throughout the rest of the way, and then they lose to another top seed. No. They played Kentucky. Kentucky took them to overtime, and we all know what the narrative around overtime is. Overtime is never supposed to be the underdog's friend. St. Peter's threw that right out the window, said, hey, no problem, we'll take Kentucky to 3 overtimes if that's what it takes. We'll beat them. Doesn't matter. We don't care. They did that. They played a very hot Murray State team in the second round, controlled the game for most of the way. I'm not even sure if they ever really trailed by more than 2 possessions in that game. They said, okay, that's easy, that's fine, we'll do that. Who's next? Oh, 3rd seed Purdue, the team that, was number 1 in the country for a week and was top 5 for a vast majority of the season. Also a favorite to win the Big Ten. They made it to the Big Ten championship. They've got some guy that's like 7'6". They've got another really big center that's on the bench, and they got a pretty good guard/forward in Jordan Ivey. St. Peter said, please, give me something tough. That's easy. We'll take them. They beat them by 3. They shut down their 2 big men and take care of Jordan Ivey. Easy. Who's next? Oh, Carolina. And that Carolina, right, that is a story in of itself. But just the way that St. Peter's, they didn't exactly have an Elite 8 run handed to them. It wasn't like they played, in the second round. It's not like they played a 10 seed, and then they played an 11 seed, and then they played, whoever. They played some real good teams. They played some tough teams. And yet, they played really, really well. They played amazing basketball. Our next Cinderella team, as just mentioned, North Carolina. Hubert Davis, and I talked about this earlier in segment number 1. Hubert Davis' first year as a head coach, and they make it to the Final Four. Is that it? Is that right? That's crazy. They knocked off the defending champions in this Final Four run in Baylor. And yeah, they had an up and down season. They were inconsistent for a lot during the regular season, but they got it together at the right time. They've been in almost a whole different basketball team in March. It's insane. They beat Marquette, Baylor, and Marquette, mind you, was a team that a lot of people were sleeping on earlier this season. To enter the season, they were winning a lot of games. They entered the top 25, and then they kind of got themselves on the map a little bit, and then they were a force to be reckoned with there. Then they go and play UCLA. As I mentioned, they were a team looking to make a repeat of their Final Four run last year. They had a lot of the same guys back from last year. Carolina beats them, and then they beat St. Peter's. So again, Carolina, this Final Four, they didn't exactly have it handed to them. They had to fight for everything, and they took care of business in every single game. There's another ACC school that I would put down as my top 10 Cinderella teams for the for March Madness, and that's Miami. Right? Miami was kind of flying under the radar this regular season. Nobody was really talking about them at all. You know, they were in the ACC tournament, obviously. They beat Boston College. Boston College was a 13th seed in the ACC tournament. Nobody really thought much about that. And then Miami kept it close with Duke in the ACC quarterfinals. And everybody looked at that as... Actually, I think that was the ACC semifinals, wasn't it? Yeah. Everybody looked at, oh, that's cute. You kept it close with Duke. Way to go. You tried, right? All right, that's okay. So we can't win them all, sweetie. And then Miami comes in, takes down a USC team who, very talented, very good team, nothing to sneeze at. And then how about the way they beat Auburn? They didn't just beat Auburn. They absolutely annihilated Auburn. Absolutely insane. I mean, Auburn, it almost felt like Auburn didn't even have a chance once Miami got out to such a big lead in the second half. I mean, they got out to a huge lead in the second half and never looked back. At this point, after that win over Auburn, you thought that Miami, maybe they should have been the 7th seed. Maybe Miami should have been a 6th or 7th seed. I mean, a 10th seed just seemed disrespectful at that point. And then they go and beat Iowa State, who, that's a Cinderella story in of itself, which we'll get to in a little bit. But actually, I think I may have them a little bit further down. Oh, no, they're in the top 10 here. So, you know, Iowa State was playing some really good basketball. Their defense was going great. And Miami just said, your defense was doing great, huh? Well, that's a shame. It'd be a real shame if somebody ruined it. And Miami just went in and did their thing once again. And makes their first Elite Eight appearance in school history. Absolutely nuts. If that doesn't say Cinderella story, I don't know what does. Michigan. Yes, Michigan. And, you know, they had a very interesting end of the season, I guess you could say, where we all saw Juwan Howard slap that Wisconsin coach across the face. He gets a hefty fine and a 5-game suspension. They lose him for the rest of the regular season, the last 5 games of the regular season, I should say. They get him back for the Big Ten tournament, their coach. Very important to have, right? Pretty important position. They lose the first game against Indiana in the Big Ten tournament. Not exactly the way you'd like to end your season. So coming into the tournament, seemed like they were fortunate to get an 11 seed, not have to play a play-in game. They were 17-11. Record wasn't all that great. Their resume looked a little bit better than some other teams, so that's how they got that bid. They played Colorado State. Colorado State was a team that, sure, they had a good season, but in a Mountain West conference, the level of competition necessarily wasn't there. So maybe a more fortunate draw for Michigan to be playing Colorado State than, say, Alabama or Texas, right? Texas was a very good 6th seed as well. So Michigan gets that one, right? I'm about to sneeze here, so I will... Oh my goodness, this is the worst case scenario ever. I cannot imagine this. Sorry, I didn't want to sneeze on live radio, but this is literally the worst. I am literally fighting a sneeze, and it won't come out. This is the worst thing that could possibly happen to me right now. This is so weird. This is the worst. So, as I was mentioning with Michigan, as I fight off the sneeze, they beat Colorado State. They get to the second round, and they're staring at them in the face is Tennessee, the SEC champion. And Michigan does their thing, right? Eli Brooks, Hunter Dickinson, Brandon Johns, Diabate, Juwan Howard coaches them up, and they knock off 3rd seed Tennessee in the second round to make that unlikely trip to the Sweet 16. And as I mentioned, against Villanova, they gave them everything they could handle. They played Villanova very well. It was just that Villanova played better. So that's my 4th Cinderella team out of the top 10 for March. My 5th is Notre Dame, and they were a first 4 team that had to play a play-in game. They nearly lost in that first 4 game. It was a double overtime game, I believe. It was either overtime or double overtime. I believe it was double overtime against Rutgers. That was probably one of the better games of the tournament. and it was a play-in game. So they almost didn't even get to play in the first round, and then they beat an Alabama team, and then they came just that close to beating Texas Tech in the second round to go to the Sweet 16. And for all intents and purposes, you could make an argument that in this postseason success, like this March, that showing from Notre Dame, you could make an argument that for all intents and purposes, Mike Bray probably just earned the right to keep his job. And which is huge because Notre Dame, like, they hadn't had really a real good year in probably a good 6 to 8 years for the basketball program. This year, sure, they were kind of middle of the pack, as many of the ACC teams were, and yet they go out and they prove themselves, hey, we're no joke, and they had a great postseason. So that's number 5. Number 6, Houston. They made the Final Four last year, and they lost a lot of players to graduating. There was a vast majority of players that graduated last year, or went to the NBA. I think a few players transferred, if I'm not mistaken. And so you looked at Houston and you thought, all right, I'm not sure how well they're going to do after losing all that they lost over the course or in between seasons. And yet they come out and they have a great season in the American Conference. They didn't really look like they struggled at all at any point of the season. They make a run. They win the American Conference Championship tournament easily. And then in comes the tournament. They get in as a 5 seed. A lot of people thought maybe they should be a 4 seed. And a lot of people were like, 4 seed, they should have been a 3 seed. I'm not sure about that. I do think you could have definitely made an argument that they should have been a 4th seed. Especially after they beat 4th seeded Illinois, a team that had a lot of talent. And for the second straight year, it goes down the drain. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But Houston, crazy story there with a lot of people, including myself, not really respecting them too much, counting them out, and so on. And then the UAB game, they handled business, and you thought, all right, whatever, they beat UAB, right? Maybe that's, we'll see. We'll really see what this team's all about when they play Illinois. Well, they almost didn't play Illinois because Illinois almost lost to Chattanooga. But they did end up playing Illinois. And they kind of embarrassed Illinois, if I do say so myself. They took care of Illinois. They beat them big. And they go to the Sweet 16 again. And make it to the second weekend again. And staring them right in the eye, staring them right in the face is Arizona, a championship favorite. And Houston comes out, didn't seem, intimidated by any means by what Arizona had to offer, and they win that game, right? And if it weren't for a valiant effort on the Villanova defense, Houston may have gone to the Final Four again. So a really crazy run from Houston this year, and just all the stuff going on with them. Losing a lot of players. They had some injuries this season. I think it was the leading scorer got hurt, and he was done for the year. And yet they make the Elite Eight. Just really impressive run from Houston. A team that didn't really make a long run in the tournament, but certainly was a story, is Richmond. And they likely wouldn't have even been in the tournament had they not won the Atlantic 10 championship. Won the Atlantic 10 tournament, I should say. They win the Atlantic 10 tournament, they get the automatic bid, and they get a super tough draw against one of the hottest teams in the country at the time in Iowa, right? Iowa wins the Big Ten tournament. They, were one of the more prolific offenses in the country at the time, and going into that game, it was just like, what do you do to stop this Iowa team? And they got so many guys that can score, it almost seemed like too tall a task for Richmond to even stay competitive in the game. And what do you know? Iowa comes out. They, stumbled a little bit. They fell on their face a little bit. And Richmond capitalized. And they win that game. And sure, they didn't play a very good game against Providence. But the fact that they were a team that was probably going to be the first 4 out, they make a run in the Atlantic 10, win the Atlantic 10 tournament, and then beat Iowa. Really, really impressive and really incredible stuff there. Iowa State is another team. They're actually number 8 here in my top 10 list of Cinderella teams in March Madness. And, as I mentioned last week, they had a less than stellar end of the season where they didn't score more than like 60 points or something in the last 5 games to end the regular season. They were, losing to teams by a lot. They weren't staying competitive. And they were top 25 at one point, and then they fell off the face of the earth. And I was surprised to even see them make the tournament because of how bad of an end of the season they had. And a lot of people thought, hey, maybe Dayton should have gotten in over them, or Oklahoma should have gotten in over Iowa State. And then Texas A&M was another popular team to say, oh, they should have gotten in over so and so. And yet Iowa State comes in and, sure, they played LSU. That was a very favorable draw, I would say. LSU, a team with all the FBI stuff going on, the cheating allegations. They fired Will Wade. It was a dumpster fire. I'm surprised they didn't like withdraw from the tournament just because of all the insane stuff going on there. So not a lot of high hopes for LSU to win that game. So you thought, all right, Iowa State's got a decent chance there. So Iowa State wins that game. And then you look at Wisconsin and you think, all right, Wisconsin's got really experienced team. They've got some really good scorers. There's no way Iowa State's going to beat Wisconsin after the way Iowa State played against teams like Texas and Baylor, right? Only not even a month ago. Well, just throw that narrative right out in the garbage, because Iowa State wins in an absolute slugfest of a game over Wisconsin, and then they play Miami, and well, all good Cinderella runs must come to an end at some point, and Iowa State's did against Miami. Number 9, New Mexico State. Sure, they only won one game, but it was against a very good UConn team. UConn was in the top 25 for the majority of the season. UConn made the Big East semifinals, and you thought, all right, UConn should at least win one game in the tournament. Well, they didn't. And New Mexico State not only beat UConn, they almost knocked off Arkansas, who, by the way, made it to the Elite Eight. And speaking of Arkansas, well, they're number 10. Because, again, they made it to the second weekend of the tournament for the second straight year. Last year, they made it to the Sweet 16. This year, they made it to the Elite Eight. They knocked off number 1 overall seed Gonzaga after a lot of people, including myself, were questioning them after they were barely beating 2 double-digit seeds in Vermont and New Mexico State. And you thought, well, all right, they just haven't had that big test yet. Gonzaga is that first big test. A lot of people, including myself, were interested to see how they would do. Not necessarily counting them out, but, didn't really think they had what it took to beat Gonzaga. Well, as said about Iowa State and Wisconsin, throw that narrative out in the garbage, because Arkansas beat Gonzaga. And then Arkansas kept it mighty close with Duke and just didn't have enough in the tank to beat Duke. So, that was pretty much that.